Get that full 10 minutes of, 5 minutes, 2 minutes of close, spread it around.
All right, we'll do what we can. Ambassador Keyes?
Well, I think what we have to recall is that every part of the government involves various costs that don't have to do with substantive programs. Personnel administration, pension costs, other things that are actually the bulk of the government's budget. So I think the honest answer to the question is that nothing should be off the table. Because in those areas, regardless of whether you're talking about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, you can find ways to improve the government's efficiency. When I was head of Citizens Against Government Waste, we went through in great detail the recommendations of the Grace Commission aimed at doing just that, and they found over $400, nearly $500 billion worth of cuts that could be made in the government by looking at those areas that are not directly related to the actual transfer payments or anything else, and that allow you to keep your promises in a more efficient way. So I don't see that anything should be off the table. We also can take greater heart and greater courage if we remember that we're not just talking about cutting government budgets. Not if we are paying attention to building up the alternatives to our reliance on the government. That's why I think we have to put on the foremost of our agenda redeveloping those structures of caring and self-reliance through which people take care of each other, care for themselves, and that especially means giving top priority to strengthening and redeveloping the privileged position and strength economically and morally of the marriage-based two-parent family. If we look at the alternatives and we develop those non-government alternatives that allow people to care for themselves, then I think we're going to have greater courage in dealing with those cuts that have to be made in government programs.
Thank you. Governor? Thank you. Ambassador Keyes?
Well, gosh, I'm tempted to say that the most important thing I can do to improve the racial climate in America is get elected President of the United States. And that's entirely my intention. Since I think at that historic moment, a lot of shibboleths, a lot of myths, a lot of nonsense and garbage said about the American people will be flushed right down the toilet where it belongs. Because I think the people of this country have common ground. I think we have common values. I think we have common commitments. I think we stand on a moral foundation that transcends race and creed and color and kind, and that was enunciated by our founders in the beginning because we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In the eyes of that Creator God, we are indeed part of a great family. We do have claims to rights and dignity. We also have responsibilities and discipline. And right now we also have a common cause, a common commitment. We see our young people in the streets dying. We see them going to school in an atmosphere of fear. We see our neighborhoods declining. We see a shadow of violence and a shadow of indiscipline over the future generations of this country. And everywhere I go, no matter what the race, no matter what the creed, no matter what the place, no matter what the background, hearts are broken by what we are seeing happening to our young. I think that's an agenda that can and will and is uniting us across every line of race. We're going to work to put back together the future for our children. And I think that's what's going to bring racial healing. We work in a common cause on our common principles to achieve that common destiny for Americans.
Thank you. Senator Lugar?
Specifically, the next President of the United States.
Next to you, Ambassador Keyes. 60 seconds, please.
Well, I got to confess that I did not find myself deeply anxious in the face of the government shutdown. And I am not sure that I would be spending my time in the presidency trying to figure out how I avoid offending Washington workers and Washington bureaucrats and Washington politicians. I think the freshman Republicans are right. Risk the government shutdown. Do what you have to do to restore what ought to be the primacy given to the interests of the American taxpayer, to getting that budget balanced, to getting those programs cut, to getting the initiative and power returned to the families of this country. That's why I believe we need something like a national retail sales tax to return initiative to the families of the country and get control of our dollars out of the hands of the government. And I also think we ought to be aiming at significant cut downs. I'd like to shut down permanently a good part of that government and return the people and the resources back to the states, back to the grassroots, back to the private sector. So I guess I'm not concerned with how we avoid government shutdown. I'm concerned with how we can produce as much of it as possible while still allowing the federal government to do its real job.
Thank you. Mr. Ford. Ambassador Keyes.
Well, I think one of the things that's sad is indeed the question itself. We've created a society in which people look to the government for things that they ought to be able to do for themselves and would be able to do if the government weren't taking so much money out of their pockets. So we take the money out of the family's pocket, and then we pretend that we're doing them a big favor when we dribble it back in the form of guaranteed student loan programs after having prevented them from saving the money against that child's education with high tax rates that give the government control of our income surplus. That's what we've got to end, and that's why I think we have to abolish this income tax system, return to the original Constitution, go to a national retail sales tax that gives people control over the money they make and earn. And when they decide what to do with it, save it, invest it, put it aside for the children's education, the government doesn't tax it at all, doesn't look at it until they decide to spend it on consumption. The savings rates go up, the ability of families to fund their own children's education go up, and we don't need the middleman of an expensive government bureaucracy handing our own money back to us. This system doesn't make sense, and it's the system itself that has to be reformed so that families can take care of their responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. From Rita McGuire of West Okoboji, Iowa. She asks, how specifically do you propose to correct the social ills of the American people, to prevent the breakup of families and reduce the dependence on the welfare state?
Actually, to tell you the truth, I don't propose to do any of that because I don't think government can fix the problems of the family. We have to understand that the government has spent several decades breaking the family. Our first order of business in the government is to stop them from doing that damage. And that's what we need to do in politics today. We need to get rid of a family-destroying welfare system that has discouraged marriage and undermined parental responsibility, allowed these males off the hook who beget children and don't take care of them. We need to revamp an educational approach that has divorced parents from the schools and given authority to educrats and bureaucrats. Through school choice, put parents back in the driver's seat, restore the connection between the moral perspective of the home and what is taught in the schools. Through reform of the income tax structure, give the material resource base of the family back to the family itself for its control and take it out of the hands of politicians and bureaucrats. I love this talk. You know, we're going to allow you to keep more of your money. I am sick of hearing people talk as if that money somehow belongs in the first instance to the government. We make it, and we should be the people who first decide how to spend it, not government politicians. And so all of these things go together to get the government out of the way. The same way if you're trying to restore a plant to health, you restore the conditions for its growth. You don't get in and try to grow for that plant. So we need to restore the conditions for the strength of the family. And if we do, the people of this country will take care of the rest. Because I believe in the end that we should be not about government, not even about good government. America is about self-government, and I am about returning to the people of this country the responsibility, the power, the money that will make that self-government once again a reality.
Thanks, Ambassador. Ambassador Keyes.
You know, in campaigns, people have a tendency, I think, to spend a good deal of time talking about themselves. The odd thing is that once they become president, they don't have to do that anymore. What they have to do is spend their time talking to us about this country. It might be good to practice it now, because the country's problems are pretty clear, and they are rooted in a crisis that we can't escape, a crisis that our children suffer from every day, and that is the crisis of the breakdown of the family. As the family crumbles, the nation crumbles. As the family crumbles, the welfare budget skyrockets because of the rise in single unwed mother-headed households. As the family crumbles, the crime intensifies, especially among the young, because of the rise in absent father families. As the family crumbles, the pressure on the entitlement system grows because that intergenerational loving and caring and concern that should be the first line of compassion breaks down. We know what the problem is. It's not budgets, it's not money, it's not a problem going on in Washington, though Washington has caused a lot of the damage that is causing it. It's a problem going on in the streets, in the neighborhoods, in the homes, as we see the basic building block of life crumble. And why is it crumbling? Is it jobs? Is it the lack of money that causes the families to fall apart? You know, if money made for strong families, strongest families in America would be in Hollywood. We know better. Families are made out of the moral fiber of the nation, out of the moral heart of the people, out of our understanding that freedom is not licentious gratification, but our ability to put the hopes and dreams of those we love in the place, very often, of that self-indulgence. And that means we reject the doctrines, like the abortion doctrine, that tell us that our children are just instruments of our pleasures and passions to be kept here only if they fit with our agenda. Return to the principles that see our rights coming from God and our freedom disciplined by respect for His authority, and we will return to the heart that can rebuild our family lives. And if we rebuild the family, put the family back together, you put the nation back together, you put the future back together for all of us and especially for our children.
Governor Alexander.